making to responsibly manage its finances and reduce the build-up in debt?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm pleased to report that responsibly managing public finances is one of the government's core priorities in this term of government. We've taken a number of steps. We've committed to a faster return to surplus in 2014-15 so we can stop the increase in public debt. We've reprioritised about $9 billion of lower priority spending in the last 3 budgets. We've told public sector chief executives to take a careful look at their own operations and tell us how they could be improved to deliver better services without extra money. And we've committed to selling minority shareholdings in 5 SOEs to New Zealanders, which we expect to raise between $5 and $7 billion over the next 3 to 5 years, money we therefore will not have to borrow in volatile overseas markets.
Simon Bridges.
Supplementary. What are some of the reasons government debt has increased in recent years?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the pre-election update showed net Crown debt had increased from $10 billion in 2008 to $40 billion last year. It was caused by a number of factors, including the government supporting the economy through the recession and the global financial crisis, rebuilding Canterbury through the $5.5 billion Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Fund, and about $7 billion in EQC expectations in paying out of earthquake claims, and the biggest factor, an unsustainable 85% increase in government spending from $35 billion a year in 2000 to $64 billion a year in 2009. That massive ramp-up in spending, Mr. Speaker, left us facing projections of never-ending deficits and ever-rising debt, and that's why the government is working hard to turn that around.
Simon Bridges.
How will the government's partial sale of shares in 4 energy companies in Air New Zealand help to reduce debt?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, it will play a very important part in our overall program. The sale to New Zealanders of minority shareholdings in Mighty River Power, Meridian, Genesis and Solid Energy in Air New Zealand will free up money to invest in priority projects like modern schools and hospitals without having to borrow that money from uncertain world financial markets. The government expects the program to raise between $5 and $7 billion over the next 3 to 5 years. I suppose our opponents, who seem very critical, should explain to New Zealanders why borrowing this money and paying more interest to overseas lenders would be better than paying dividends to New Zealanders.
The Honourable David Parker.
Is he aware that at the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee this morning, the Office of the Auditor-General, giving evidence of its audit of Treasury's implementation of the Crown Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme, said that so far as they could ascertain at the time, Treasury did not report in writing to him or any other minister that finance company liabilities were growing sharply in the 6 months after the guarantee, which increased the risk by the Crown by more than $100 million in that period alone.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I obviously wasn't attending that committee meeting this morning. However, I would point out that the Auditor-General report on the Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme found that the scheme worked as intended to protect the stability of the financial system overall. It did identify some issues early on in the scheme that needed to be tightened up, and from about March 2009 it identified that they were. That is, of course, hardly surprising given the scheme was put in place in haste by the previous government in the middle of an election campaign.
The Honourable David Parker.
Is he concerned by the Auditor-General's finding in its performance audit that the Treasury monitoring and reporting to ministers or non-reporting to ministers of increases of more than $100 million in finance company deposits and increasingly risky lending was inadequate?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, Treasury of course only had limited powers to stop companies growing their books. And that's one of the difficulties and the moral hazard of a retail deposit guarantee scheme. And I think that's one of the challenges, and I'm sure it was one of the challenges the Finance Minister faced at the time when they were trying to deal with, on the one hand, the risks and stability of the whole financial system, and then the issue about potentially encouraging people to deposit into guaranteed finance companies, Mr. Speaker. So that is one of the challenges, and Treasury, the report says as Treasury could have monitored some things more closely and asked companies why it was occurring, but that doesn't necessarily translate into stopping companies unless they were in breach of their deed.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does his first answer to Mr. Bridges possibly mean when he said that the government was committed to selling these shares to New Zealanders, that no foreign interest will obtain any share if there's a full New Zealander subscription?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, we've been on record saying that about 85 to 90% of those companies would be owned by New Zealand mum and dad investors and, of course, the government's 51% cornerstone shareholder.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston
Speaker,
Peters.
I'm asking him from his words whether or not he admits the possibility of what he's saying by way of assurance is true, that it is possible no foreigner will obtain any of these shares. That's the question.
Well, with respect, I thought the Minister's answer was that no, he can't give that assurance that, well, he didn't use exactly those words, but it was perfectly clear what he was saying, that there was a certain percentage the government expected to remain in New Zealand hands, and therefore some of the rest could end up in foreign hands. Simon Bridges.
What the Minister seen supporting the partial floats of these state-owned enterprises?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have seen a report in today's New Zealand Herald which says there's a strong interest from the investing public in these partial floats. For example, Hamilton Hendon Green Director Grant Williamson is quoted as saying, "We've had a rather large number of investors show interest, including new investors that may have not been in the market for some time." As ministers have said, the government expects between 85 and 90% New Zealand ownership of these companies, including the government's commitment to retain at least 51%.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Can I ask the Minister, is the answer to my question no, or does he need to translate it from somewhere else?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, if the member is asking me the answer to that question that he just asked is no, I suppose the only correct answer is that I don't know, because he hasn't actually asked me a question in the question.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
You were seeking to be helpful to me in explaining what answer he had given. I'm asking now a very direct question. Is the answer no to my first question?
I think it's perfectly obvious what the Right Honourable Winston Peters means, and I think the Minister could answer it. The member is simply asking, is the answer to the first question he put to the Minister today no? And I think that's capable of being answered. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the only trouble is I can't remember exactly what he asked in his first question today, and so I don't know whether I'm answering no in the affirmative or in the negative.
Order. I think I can offer remedy.
Can I help?
I can offer remedy for the situation. Order, I'm on my feet. I invite the Right Honourable Member to repeat his first question.
Is the answer to the question that I first raised with respect to Mr. Well, actually, for your help, I'm trying to put it in a more simple way.
Order. Now, what I actually invited the Right Honourable Member to do was to repeat his first question, where he was complaining about the fact that he felt it wasn't answered adequately, and that led to his second question, which led to confusion because the Minister wasn't sure what I was asking. So I invited the member to repeat his first question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does it mean, given his answer to Simon Bridges, was that the government was committed to selling these shares to New Zealanders, that it is possible no foreigner will be able to buy any shares at all in these enterprises?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, it is always possible that no foreigner may end up buying shares, but the government's stated intention is for New Zealand shareholders to be at the front of the queue, and we expect around 85 to 90% of those companies to be held by New Zealanders, including the government's 51% share, once the share offer has taken place.
Question number 2, Charles Chauvel.